May is a great month in our gardens. It's also one of the busiest gardening months of the year because it's a crossover month. What do I mean by that? Well, some of our cool weather crops like radishes, lettuce, kale, and bok choy are starting to come in, and by the end of the month, it's going to be warm enough to plant our hot weather crops out in the garden. So we'll be starting the process of transitioning our garden from cool to hot weather crops. May and June are the months in the spring where we'll have both sets of crops out in our garden. I transplanted our rhubarb to a sunnier location last fall at the end of the season, and they seem to like their new sunnier spot even better. I'm not sure we'll harvest a lot of rhubarb this year as it's adjusting to its new space, but we should be set for several years moving forward. The garlic we planted last fall is growing nicely, and we'll be eating fresh asparagus from our perennial asparagus bed all month long because May and June are the prime months for asparagus. May is also a big month in our flower garden. We'll see a lot of perennial bulbs bloom in May, but some of our early bloomers are already starting to fade away as they depart before the heat of the summer sets in. Tulips and daffodils will come and go before the end of the month. We'll see irises blooming in mid to late May and into early June. Our lupines and bachelor buttons are growing nicely now, and by the end of the month or into early June, they're both going to be blooming. We'll also enjoy blooms from some of the trees in our yard. Chanticleer pears bloom at the beginning of the month, followed by our dogwood and crabapple trees. And if the weather cooperates, the blooms can be just spectacular. Most of the perennial bulbs in the bed in front of the house will be done for the season in the month of May. And rather than letting this area just sit there doing nothing for the rest of the summer, I've started planting some hot weather vegetables in these beds. This area is wide open, so I have to carefully choose what to plant so I don't attract animals. A few years ago, I started with butternut squash, and I found out that okra grew really well out here. In fact, okra grew better here than in any other spot in my garden. So I'm going to actually fill these beds with okra plants, which grow pretty tall, and I'm going to interplant butternut and acorn squash that's going to grow underneath them. Now, I mentioned that May is a crossover month because we can have both cool weather and hot weather crops growing in our gardens at the same time. But this only works if we planned our plant spacing well. For example, I grew a cool weather crop, bok choy, right where I knew tomatoes would be going at the end of the month because I knew I'd be harvesting the bok choy before the tomatoes needed the space. Now, I also planted things like lettuce and kale around where the tomatoes were going to be planted because the lettuce will be harvested before the tomatoes need the space. And in advance of the space that my summer squash are going to need when the weather gets hot, I planted radishes in those areas, knowing that all these cool weather crops would be out of the garden by the time that the summer squash needed the space in June and July. Now, we're picking vegetables from our gardens every day now, and there's more to pick as the month progresses. A few hot days during the month and our cool weather crops get noticeably bigger by the day. We're enjoying asparagus and lettuce almost every single day. You could plant a second and maybe even a third crop of radishes a few weeks apart to keep a constant supply of radishes up until about the end of June. Our onions and beets are growing nicely in the weather we get in May, and our garlic plants are really starting to grow and come along. But it's still too early to enjoy any of these crops just yet. Beets will be ready in June. We'll get to enjoy garlic scapes, which are the flowers, in June before we pick our garlic in early July. But our onions need more time and won't be ready until late July or early August. I have to confess that I really enjoy Greek salads after visiting Greece a number of years ago on vacation. Greek salads have peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, and oregano as ingredients, and I've struggled to get them all to be ready at the same time because my cucumbers tend to come in early and they're mostly done by the time the tomatoes and peppers come in. Now, I'm pretty sure that the high nitrogen levels in my soil delay my tomatoes and peppers, so this year I'm going to plant cucumbers later than I normally would to see if I could get everything to come in at the same time. I'm going to plant my cucumbers in mid to late June where my beets are growing right now, waiting until I've harvested enough beets to make room for the cucumber plants. Time will tell if this is going to work out.